Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Harmony Insights lunch date. My name is Erich Kurschat. I'm the owner of Harmony Insights LLC, a company that allows me to work with organizations and consultants using the DISC personality assessment, much of which is done online these days, virtually completing those assessments and bringing people together for workshops as they continue working remotely or consider being brought back to the office. I'm also the founder of the HR Hot Seat Inclusive Mastermind community, a community of, as we say, real HR pros solving real HR problems. The next HR Hot Seat Chicago event is actually tomorrow evening from about 6 until 8 or 6:30 until 8, depending on whether or not you show up early. And it's entirely free. Everything we do these days is virtual, as you can imagine. And it's just a lot of fun. So if you are an HR professional or you serve HR professionals, I would love to have you in the mix. We have over 2,500 members in 10 licensed chapters around the country. And so you can find out more about HR Hot Seat at hrhotseat.com. Today's Harmony Insights lunch date is just one in a series of lunch dates that I've had to reconnect with people who have really inspired me over time. And I've been doing these for a couple months now. I can't believe it's been that much or been that long. But anyway, today's guest, Annemarie Shrouder of Annemarie Shrouder International, is somebody that I've been eager to reconnect with, and this is the perfect opportunity. So Annemarie, thank you so much for being a part of, being my lunch date today.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm so happy to talk to you for like 30 minutes.
Yep, we got 30 whole minutes. I call them lunch dates because it's my lunch hour here in the Central Time Zone. It may not be lunch wherever you are, but you're welcome to eat it. So over the next 30 minutes, you will stay muted. And if you have lunch with you, by all means, consume it and enjoy. Annemarie, I am excited to have you as my lunch date today. And I think especially eager to hear your thoughts on today's topic. We have titled this, if I can find it, Deeper Conversations in Diversity and Inclusion. Right off the bat, people who have attended these know that I choose my guests and they choose the topics. My guests choose the topics. So what is it, as we get into your own introduction here, what is it about the work that you do and have done that positions you well for this topic in particular today?
Well, the overview about my work is that I've been doing diversity, inclusion, and belonging consulting, facilitating, speaking for the last 16 years as my own business, and a little bit before that as a teacher. So I have a teaching background. That's the professional side. I love this work. How I do this work is all about dialogue, community, conversation. So there's that overlay, and I'm a person of color. These are the times when we get to talk more and more about what that means, right? The last few weeks, which has been amazing. I think it's been amazing to be able to have people leaning into those conversations more. And I'm also part of the LGBTQ2SI plus communities, so that gives me another lens. So I really feel like, not just from a professional place, but from a personal place, it is imperative that we have deeper conversations so we can connect more, so that we can get to know each other more, so that we can remember that we are connected. And I think COVID has done a good job of that in some respects.
Yeah. I entirely agree. We're already seeing some people introducing themselves in the chat area, and Fred adds, I was lucky enough to be raised in the most diverse community in the world. He says Jackson Heights / Elmhurst, New York, and I'm always up for learning and hearing more. And I think that that's such an important point to make, that regardless of our background, what we're doing professionally now, this openness to wanting to learn more and to educate ourselves. And
Absolutely.
I find that a lot of the attendees of these lunch dates fall very squarely into that bucket of people that say, I'm always learning. I always have something to learn about different people's perspectives.
Right.
Your perspective today is going to be so valuable to us in this conversation. A couple of weeks ago, I decided it was really important that I figure out how I'm going to contribute to the conversation that's taking place right now. And I am far from somebody who's well versed in this topic myself. It is not an area of subject matter expertise for me, and honestly takes me outside my comfort zone. I will admit that very readily. And so I really wanted to then facilitate these conversations, bringing in people for whom this is in their wheelhouse, we'll say, some but people who have been doing this work for quite some time to offer their perspective. In our what we put together online, we talked about, or the description for today's conversation, you were very particular about distinguishing between two mindsets,
Mm,
um, either or
yeah.
being one of those mindsets, and both and being the second of the two, which immediately made me think of Carol Dweck and the fixed versus growth mindset.
Mhm.
I don't know how closely tied this is in your mind. Could you tell us a little bit about how you see the differences between these two mindsets of either or and both and?
Sure. And to do that, I have to tell you a little bit about how I arrived there, if you don't
Please
mind.
do. Please do.
I am a person of color, but and I used to use the word biracial. I don't like to use it anymore because we're just to raise awareness about the fact that race is a social construct and something that somebody made up. But my mother is white European and my father is Black Caribbean. And for me, growing up, being biracial was a very polarizing experience. So, you're not Black enough for the Black kids. I'm not white. So where do I fit? Where do I belong? And so there was always a push pull, either or, us and them, back and forth. And that experience for me personally in my body and who I am is what we see out in the world around race, but around all other identities, right? Gay and straight, cisgender, transgender, like just so there's something there's something about that polarization that in the work that I do now, I'm encouraging people to step away from and into that place of both and I always like to hold my hands like this, like a little cup, right? Like a place where we can be together in a space, recognize that we are different, but come to that conversation in a way that we can hear each other and move forward together. So when we look at that and through the lens of workplaces, there's and it doesn't have to just be about identity. It can be about anything. If you any kind of situation you're in, there's if you think about it carefully, if you talk about it, if you open up the conversation, there's often a both and being in the space of both and, or you could call it the gray area, it's such a rich opportunity to learn, to hear, to understand, and to then use all that information to move forward together. And personally, in a workplace, in whether you're specifically focusing on D&I or not, we need that as human beings in order to create spaces where people can thrive, where people feel seen, where people feel valued.
Yeah. I I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about even previous conversations I've had. It's just funny how you find common threads in the conversations you have. For example, I've had previous lunch dates with people who are improvisers, comedic improvisers, talking about the concept of yes and, building on
Yeah,
what's already been put out there and
yeah,
accepting and embracing other people's perspectives and contributions
mhm,
and opinions and building on that instead of shutting it down or saying, well, there's only one right way to do this. I think I figured it out. So you need to, good luck with whatever you're working on. it's
exactly.
embracing what's already been contributed and building on that in some way.
And recognizing that it's complicated,
Yes,
you know?
that is like the word of the month, isn't it?
Is it? Yeah.
Well, much farther back than the last month, but I hear that so often. People are saying, well, it's really complicated, and it is.
But human beings are complex,
Yeah,
and that's we need to recognize that it's not always an easy answer.
yeah.
There's often more, and if we think about intersectionality, there's more to consider either than what you see or what you immediately know or what's on your radar. We have to step into that.
So, I promise people that we're going to cover a couple of things during these lunch dates. Number one, talk about the challenges that we face on the topic, around the topic. And then two, make sure we're ending on some really actionable tips that our attendees can take away with them to experience some amount of success
Mhm.
in a positive direction. So I'd love to start by talking about the challenges. And I don't know if this is a good segue into what you and I were talking about just before we got started here today. You were saying that business has been particularly good for you recently, that you have been busy in a number of different ways. My guess is because people are recognizing that they do have challenges that they are currently facing, that their organizations are currently facing related to this topic of diversity and inclusion. What have you identified as some of uh, let me start over. What challenges have you seen and experienced in the people who have been seeking your attention lately?
Good question. So, it's important to just say out loud that what happened to George Floyd in the US and the ripple effects of that in terms of riots and protests, not just in the US, but in Canada and around the world, is a game changer, I think. And because of that, because of the visibility around it, because there's a video, because there's been riots, because of all the ripples that we've seen, um, I have had people calling me in the last 2 weeks that actually use the word anti-Black racism. That rarely happens from a corporate space or from a company space, in my experience. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but in my experience, as somebody who does this work,
You're
I was
saying they're using very specific language that you typically don't hear, very
yeah,
focused language. Yeah.
very focused. Like the term anti-Black racism is not a term that I'm offering; it's a term that I'm hearing. Um, and that's exciting to me because we need to use specific language to get at the heart of the issues that are happening, right? To really be able to crack those open and have honest and deeper conversations about them. And just to contextualize that, when I started my business 16 years ago, I quickly learned that I had to make a decision because I was doing anti-oppression work. I came from a teaching background. I was like, we need to learn about privilege. We need to know about, social location, how we see the world, how that's different. And what I was noticing was, can't have that conversation. Maybe in not-for-profit, maybe, but not in corporate. And so I started using the D&I phrase, right? I do the work when I get in, right? We have those bigger, deeper conversations, but anti-oppression was a scary term. And now to have people calling me and saying, we want to learn more about anti-Black racism and the systemic nature of it, I'm just like, amazing, right?
Not
So
quite that we've arrived, but it's just so refreshing, right, to hear this language that
it's
is
refreshing.
going to result in really meaningful dialogue.
Absolutely. Well, we hope it will result in meaningful
Yeah.
dialogue, right?
Right.
There's a lot of work yet to do. I'm not saying we've arrived in the sense of people are saying the word and our prime minister is using the word, so now we're good. That's not at all what I'm saying, but when there's a willingness to use the terminology, it signals a willingness to have a conversation that may not have been there before. And so a lot of companies that are reaching out to me are like, we've had diversity and inclusion on our radar already, but we want to make it more overt. We want to have a deeper commitment. Some companies are just getting started, right? So there's a wide gamut of who I've been chatting with over the last couple of weeks. And to all of that, I'm hopeful that we're in a time of meaningful change in this particular conversation, because the types of questions that people are asking, the language that they are volunteering is different than I've heard before. And so that gives me a lot of hope.
For those of us who are playing along from home and have been listening to what you've been saying, they would have caught the words prime minister, which
Yeah, I'm in Canada.
tips us off to the fact that you are not indeed in the United States.
It's not in the United States.
What is your perception of how the response to the George Floyd killing has been different, if it has been different at all, in Canada versus the United States?
Ooh. So I have to preface my answer by I'm not a big follower of politics. Okay. And I'm also, yeah, so I have to say that. But I think what I've seen on our end is a willingness to use, first of all, the term anti-Black racism. Like our prime minister has been on the record as saying it's real, it happens.
Mm-hmm.
and I there, to be frank, there's two things I think about that, right? As a person of color, I'm like, yeah, we know. You know?
Yeah.
No surprise here. Yes.
Right.
Thank you. Right. And the other part is that's why allyship is so important, right? Because somebody in a leadership role, in a position of like in a huge position of power, who is not a person of color, has said anti-Black racism is real. And so I recognize that there will be people in Canada for whom that's the first time they've heard that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Really, maybe even at all, but really, it's sunk in. Like, oh, let me think. What is that? Like, what? You know?
Yeah.
So allyship is crucial in these conversations, so that because some people won't hear the won't hear it. Period. Won't hear the conversation unless it's spoken by somebody for whom it's not an issue.
You're mentioning that there are people that may not have heard that before. Deborah chimed in saying that she's from Spokane, Washington, not the most diverse city with only 2.2% minority population.
Mm.
That reminds me of, I think it was a TED Talk that I saw recently where someone said that it's not unheard of that in many communities around the country, you can go your entire life not having an acquaintance, a coworker, a friend, who is a person of color, and nobody will tell you that you've missed out on anything in the meantime. No one will bring it to your attention that that is indeed a deficit.
Yeah.
And so that's what I thought of when you mentioned that there are some people in Canada and certainly in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
um, who are hearing things now for the first time that they needed to have heard or would have benefited from hearing, well before now.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And the systemic nature of the conversation is also something that's a deeper conversation, right? Because I think we're more we have heard more about racism interpersonally, whether that's anti-Black racism or racism in general. And what I'm uh, heartened by is that there's more willingness to talk about the systemic nature
Mhm.
of racism, which we all are swimming in, and which is hard to see when it doesn't impact you.
Yeah. It's
So
hard to see, and perhaps there's also the sense that it's hard to do anything about. As soon as you use the word systemic or institutionalized, immediately I think, how do we even begin to chip away at that? How
it's
do you
daunting.
respond to that? How do you respond to that question when people say, yeah, I see it's systemic, but I have no idea where to begin with that?
Yeah, I agree. It's daunting. And we all have to step into conversations, to our own education, to being willing to see more, see differently, to be challenged, and to commit to taking a closer look or a deeper look, and reading, taking sessions, whatever, however you want to educate yourself, conversations with people in your family, conversations with people in your life, conversations with people at work. um, we step into changing a system by educating ourselves. The more we get educated together, right, the more we will push back against the way that things are, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's by lack of education and lack of awareness and lack of these deeper conversations with coworkers and friends and family members that keep us um, unaware, sometimes blissfully unaware, right? Sometimes purposely unaware, but we need to step into those, so that race is a social construct. It was designed, developed, created by somebody, and perpetuated. So then we can deconstruct it.
Jessica in the chat is suggesting that the key to change might be empathy, and that's certainly something that's being discussed a lot these days, and has been for quite some time. But especially these days, being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, or see life through somebody else's eyes. Um, we're talking about, well, we have some people on the call today who are just interested as individuals, how they can contribute meaningfully to this conversation. We also have a number of people who are perhaps shepherding other people
Mm-hmm.
through the process and through the conversation, and facilitating conversation among team members and employees where they work, maybe because they're in an HR position, or they're in just a leadership role where they benefit from being able to do that effectively.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd love to talk with you about some of the challenges specifically um, faced in your experience by organizations who mean well, and maybe they've put out some fantastic press releases and social media posts that sound sound great,
Mhm.
but really have a difficult time connecting those posts with meaningful action internally. What are some of the challenges that you think organizations face when it comes to making things happen,
Mhm.
taking action?
Awareness. So we're in an age where there's less of a lack of awareness, right? Because of what we're seeing in the media, but awareness of, what this means. This is not a workshop. This is not a one-off. This is a journey that we take with organizations over time, over long periods of time, right? So we need awareness of what it means to do this work, a willingness to hear what's required, a willingness to talk to your people to see what's going on for them, right? Often in leadership positions, if the environment feels good to us, it's that both and again, right? Same environment, but totally different situations. So experiences. So in leadership, often what we find is that leaders feel like, yeah, we're doing really well. Our culture is good. We're people feel good coming here. And then when we do the data analysis, if we do a survey or we have focus groups, sometimes we hear differently from some segments of the workplace, be it around gender or skin color or et cetera, et cetera. And so there needs to be a willingness to hear what's going on for people, right? And to take that seriously. Um, some of the other challenges, particularly in leadership, is now we need to. So we may have some idea of what's happening for your staff, but what does that mean in terms of how you're doing things, right? We can't just keep things going the way they have been. There needs to be some changes, systems, policies, practices, and that's challenging, right? Because you're moving, you might have a small organization, or if you have a really large organization, we know that those changes take time and we have to turn the ship, so to speak. So um, I would say that there's, except for the fact that you're running an organization, or you're in charge of more than just yourself in terms of the people that are reporting to you, or HR, you're taking care of everyone.
Mhm.
The challenges are very similar individually as they would be for the company, right? Because we have to step in, we have to be willing, we have to be open. It's uncomfortable. There's changes that are going to be required of us, and we may not know what those are ahead of time. Guaranteed, we don't know what they all are ahead of time, because they're going to come up as we do the work. And just like when we gain more comfort in having one-on-one conversations, people will lean in further and we'll hear more, right? So just similarly in organizations, when we get more comfortable having those conversations and the learning that we're doing, other things are going to surface because the space becomes safer for
Yeah.
people to share, right? So it's a continual, it never ends.
I feel like there's also an assumption that it's somebody else's work to do, especially when you get to the organizational level. Everybody looks at HR and says, "Okay, what do we do?" and and that's a role that HR is willing to take on. But I don't know if it either begins or ends with HR. I think that they're an important piece of that puzzle, but I think it's on each of us, whether or not we call ourselves leaders or have the word leader in our title, or regardless of what our title is, it's on each of us to do that self education and to learn what we can contribute in ways that we deem to be meaningful, or that others are saying, this would be a very meaningful way to contribute. Do you see that same sort of assumption being made by other people, to say, well, I'm not sure that this is me, or maybe I know it's me, but I have no idea where to begin, so I'm going to assume that somebody else is going to come along and give me some direction to push me
Yeah,
one way or another?
I think so. And we hear that with allies, right? I don't know what to say. What if I say the wrong thing? So then sometimes we give ourselves an out to not say anything because we don't want to make a mistake, which is which is tragic,
Yeah.
right? Um, and I'm sure allies have had situations where they've said something and somebody has not reacted well to that. Um, and you know, hooray for you for stepping in, right, and not being the bystander. And we learn, we have to, allyship requires that we're open to learning and hearing feedback from folks. So the next time you do it a little bit differently,
Yeah.
right? With the knowledge that also the next time it's going to be a different person or a different context. So that's also going to change. But yeah, HR, I have a soft spot for HR because I think you all get a lot on your plate, and diversity and inclusion work, belonging work, it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody needs to step into those conversations. Someone needs to start creating the space for that. And so that could be HR. Amazing if it's the leadership team, you know?
Right.
As soon as we have a leadership team, it's like, yes, we can move forward. But yeah, it's everybody's job.
So I've had a question for you, and I meant to ask it earlier. So organizations have talked about diversity and inclusion,
Mhm.
and then I've seen inclusion and diversity, and I've seen diversity, equity, and inclusion,
Mhm.
and I've seen I've seen the word belonging thrown
Yes.
in, which I love. That might be my favorite of all of it because I think it ties everything together so well. Um, maybe it's just semantics, but I think that there's power in words.
Yes.
What what resonates really well with you when an organization says, yes, these are our fill in the blank efforts?
Yeah.
What do you like to hear them say?
I like all of those. Not to cop out of your answer. I use diversity and inclusion and belonging. I'm using more and more now.
Yeah,
I love the belonging piece because it just, for me, it's even more of a wraparound hug than inclusion is. There's
yeah,
something about that word that I can fall into, and I think people fall into more easily from a personal place. Um, Equity, I like the word because it reminds us that it's not about treating people the same, right? We definitely want to have the same respect and you know regard for humanity, but because of who we are and quote unquote where we come from, we may need different things
mhm,
to feel safe in the space, to be able to achieve in the space because of the systemic isms that are happening. So I like that word, although my company used to have a different name and it had equitable in the middle and people thought I was a bank. So, so, so equity is an interesting, right? It's a
yeah,
tricky.
right. Financial, yeah,
Yeah. So I definitely love the term belonging the most.
yeah,
And recently I've been thinking, like, why the word diversity? Like, why don't we just call it humanity and belonging and inclusion? Like, because
yeah,
we're all diverse, and diversity, we sometimes when we think of diversity, we think of very specific groups. But
yeah,
hello, like as soon as two people are in the room, you have diversity. They may look
yeah.
very, very similar. So sometimes I like to play with that. Like, I wonder.
I love it. So you're going to give us a new term. Now all of a sudden we're going to have
Yeah.
entirely new departments springing up left and right because of Annemarie Shrouder.
Oh boy. Well, we'll see. We'll
I
see.
love it though. That's great. Whatever words we use, it means we're using words, right? We're having a conversation. There is a dialogue. And so
Yes.
whatever words we choose, as long as we're using them. Wonderful. So we have different people chiming in with all sorts of fantastic things. I love that Sharon says, the executive level is where change should begin.
Absolutely.
When driven by HR only, the cultural change is not as, or when driven by HR only, the cultural change is not as impactful. So that could be an entire conversation in and of itself. But I love that people are saying, yeah, it's not just human resources. They can be involved in the conversation, but we all need to be to some extent. Annemarie, I mean, this is how things go. The 30 minutes blow by very quickly,
Good.
as they did today. I feel like we could certainly continue talking. People are going to want to follow up with you, I'm sure, to pick your brain on this topic, find out what you do for organizations and individuals. Where can people find you online?
They can find me on LinkedIn, where we've been spreading the word about your chats.
Uh-huh.
My website is annemarieshrouder.com. Maybe I should put it in the chat. Would that help?
Yeah, go ahead.
Put it in the chat. annemarieshrouder.com. There it is in the chat.
And while Annemarie is doing that, we will follow up with everyone who is on today's call with some resources, some of which may have been mentioned, maybe some weren't mentioned, but I'll follow up via email. I'll blind copy everybody, and then we'll include links to resources for further learning.
Yeah.
Um, if you enjoyed this conversation, I certainly hope you did. I would love to have you back for another Harmony Insights lunch date. Coming up this week on Thursday, Steve Brown, who is the VP of HR for La Rosa's Pizzeria in Ohio, he's amassed quite a following. Some have called him the most connected, well-connected person in human resources. We have 118 people registered for that. so far. That's on Thursday. So he always draws a crowd, and I hope people will come back for that. On Friday, my friend and HR Hot Seat Chicago member Maya Bordeaux is going to be, we're going to have a conversation titled addressing what do I have here, addressing the pandemic of racism in the workplace. And so that's going to be a continuation of our conversation today. Next week on Tuesday, Camelia Klingscales Major is she's the head of diversity and inclusion for GE Healthcare. We're going to have a conversation called Creating Space for Conversations on Race and Inequality. And then next Thursday, Jennifer McClure, who's the CEO of Disrupt HR. And then on Friday, another pop-up panel where I choose panelists in the moment, on the spot, from people who are there and volunteer to be in a panel. This one is going to be on the topic of vulnerability. So those have been a lot of fun, and we're having our third pop-up panel next Friday. So all of this can be found at harmonyinsights.com/lunchdates. In a moment, I'm going to encourage you to unmute yourselves. If you need to go about your afternoon, you're welcome to do that. I'm so glad that you spent 30 minutes with us today. But in the meantime, Annemarie Shrouder, I am so grateful to you for being a part of this conversation and contributing your perspective on a very worthwhile and important topic today.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure to chat with you.